Clara Hayes was the kind of woman whose heart always guided her steps, even when her own life was far from easy. From the outside, she looked like an ordinary elementary school teacher, someone who carried stacks of papers in her worn leather bag, wore simple dresses, and had the kind of smile that instantly put children at ease. But behind her soft brown eyes was a story of struggle, determination, and an endless love for children who had no one else to fight for them. She grew up in the same small town where she later worked. Her childhood had not been rich in money, but it was rich in lessons of kindness. Clara's father had been a factory worker, and her mother stayed at home to care for Clara and her two younger brothers. There were times when the family barely made it to the end of the month, but her parents always believed that education was the one thing no one could ever take away. Her father used to say, "Books will open doors that money cannot." Those words stayed in her heart forever. When she was a child, Clara had a teacher named Mrs. Collins who changed her life. Mrs. Collins was not strict in the way many teachers were. She was gentle, patient, and had a gift for noticing when a child was sad or struggling. Clara remembered the day Mrs. Collins slipped an extra sandwich into her bag when she knew Clara hadn't eaten breakfast. That single act of quiet kindness planted a seed in her heart. One day, Clara promised herself, she would do the same for other children. She didn't want to be remembered as just another teacher who gave lessons from a book. She wanted to be remembered as someone who gave hope. Life was not easy when Clara finally became a teacher. After graduating with a degree in education, she had high hopes, but reality quickly humbled her. Teaching in a public school in a struggling town meant long hours, limited resources, and a paycheck that was hardly enough to cover her own expenses. At the same time, her mother had fallen ill and needed medication that wasn't cheap. Clara lived in a small apartment, just big enough for her and her mother, and sometimes she wondered if she had chosen the wrong path. She could have taken a different job, one that paid more. But every time she stood in front of her classroom, looking at the curious faces of her students, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. Clara loved her students as if they were her own children. She noticed the small things: who came to school with shoes too tight for their growing feet, who pretended they weren't hungry when lunchtime came, who struggled quietly in the back of the class hoping not to be noticed. She knew each child's laugh, their fears, and the unspoken worries they carried on their small shoulders. To her, teaching was not just about math or spelling. It was about protecting the fragile light in every child before the world could dim it. Despite her dedication, Clara's days were often exhausting. She would wake up before sunrise to prepare lessons, make sure her mother was comfortable, and then head to school. The classroom was her sanctuary, but it was also demanding. 30 children, all with different needs, filled her day with noise, laughter, and sometimes tears. Some days, she went home so tired that she fell asleep with her clothes still on, papers scattered around her. But when she woke up, she always told herself the same thing: they need me. I can't give up. Her colleagues admired her but also pitied her. They knew she worked harder than anyone else, yet her life seemed to be a series of sacrifices. Clara rarely bought anything new for herself. Instead, she spent her little extra money on pencils, notebooks, or snacks for the kids who came to school without them. It wasn't unusual for her to quietly place a granola bar in a desk or slip a new set of crayons into a backpack that had seen better days. She never told the children it was from her. She wanted them to feel cared for, not pitied. There was a gentleness in Clara's teaching that students responded to. Children who were restless in other classes seemed calmer with her. Those who struggled with reading tried harder because she believed in them. Even parents who rarely attended school meetings found themselves writing notes of gratitude for the way Clara encouraged their children. But behind her smile, there was always a quiet weight on her shoulders: the constant worry about her mother's health, the unpaid bills piling up on the kitchen table, and the fear of how long she could keep juggling everything. Still, Clara carried herself with dignity. She walked into school every morning with her hair neatly tied back, a stack of papers pressed to her chest, and a warm smile ready for the first child who greeted her. No one could see the late nights she spent balancing her checkbook or the tears she shed when she thought about all the things she couldn't give her mother. What the world saw was a teacher who never lost her patience, even on the hardest days. Her love for teaching wasn't just about lessons. It was about stories. Clara had a way of telling stories that made even the simplest ideas come alive. If she was teaching math, she would weave it into a tale about sharing apples in a village. If it was history, she would paint vivid pictures of the past, so her students felt like they were walking through it themselves. To her, stories were the bridge between knowledge and imagination. And more than once, a student who had nearly given up on learning found new energy in her classroom because of the way she made learning feel like an adventure. The truth, though, was that Clara herself often felt like she was fighting a quiet battle. Her salary was never enough, and her school didn't have many resources to support teachers like her. She sometimes stayed after school just to clean the classroom because the janitorial staff was short-handed. On winter mornings, she would arrive early to warm up the room with her small electric heater before the children arrived. She didn't complain, but the constant giving left her weary. And yet, if anyone asked her why she didn't leave teaching for something easier, her answer was always the same. "Because I know what it feels like to be that child," she would say softly. "The one who doesn't have enough. The one who feels forgotten. And I want them to know they're not invisible." In those quiet words was the truth about Clara Hayes. She wasn't just a teacher. She was a lifeline. Her classroom was more than a place of learning. It was a safe space where children could feel valued, even if the rest of the world told them otherwise. And though her own life was filled with sacrifices, Clara believed that her purpose was greater than her pain. That belief, however, would soon be tested in ways she never imagined. For in her classroom sat children whose struggles would bring her face to face with choices that could change the course of her life forever. The winter that year was colder than usual. Frost clung to the windows of the small elementary school where Clara taught, and children shuffled into the classroom with red noses and icy hands. For most of them, the cold was only a small discomfort. They had warm homes waiting at the end of the day, thick coats and boots that kept the snow out. But for a few children, winter meant hardship. Clara knew this better than anyone because she paid attention to the details most people ignored. One boy, in particular, had caught her attention that season: Daniel. He was a quiet child, small for his age, with dark hair that often fell into his eyes. Unlike other children, he never joined in loud laughter during recess or raised his hand excitedly during lessons. He sat in the back of the classroom, watching, listening, and sometimes trying to disappear into the corner of his desk. Clara noticed how thin his jacket was and how the soles of his shoes were wearing out. On especially cold mornings, she could see his fingers trembling as he tried to hold his pencil. It wasn't just his clothing that troubled her. Daniel often came to school without lunch. When it was time for the children to line up for the cafeteria, he would hesitate, sometimes pretending he wasn't hungry. Other times, he would take the free lunch provided by the school but eat slowly, stretching every bite as though he didn't know when his next meal would come. Clara's heart ached each time she saw it. She had grown up knowing what it felt like to go without, and she recognized the quiet signs of poverty that others overlooked. Her instinct was to protect him, but she had to tread carefully. Teachers weren't supposed to interfere too much in personal matters. Still, she found small ways to help. She kept extra snacks in her drawer and, without saying a word, would place one on his desk when no one was looking. She made sure to compliment his work in front of others so that he didn't feel invisible. But despite her efforts, she couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel carried a heavy burden far too large for a child his age. The turning point came one chilly afternoon in January. The cafeteria staff had reported that food supplies seemed to be going missing. It wasn't much: a few rolls of bread, sometimes a piece of fruit. Whispers spread quickly among the staff and reached the ears of the principal, Mr. Green. He was a strict man who cared more about rules and order than the children themselves. When Daniel was caught slipping a small roll of bread into his pocket, the whispers became accusations. Clara had been helping another student when she saw Daniel being pulled aside by a cafeteria worker. His small hands trembled as the bread was taken from him, and his face turned pale with fear. The other children giggled and whispered, and Daniel's eyes filled with shame. Clara's heart tightened. She could not stand by and watch. The next day, she was summoned to the principal's office. Mr. Green sat behind his large desk, his expression cold and stern. "Mrs. Hayes," he said firmly, "we have a problem. One of your students has been stealing food. This behavior cannot be tolerated. Children must learn discipline, or they will carry bad habits into adulthood." Clara sat quietly for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Then she spoke, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "With all due respect, Daniel is not stealing because he is greedy or careless. He is hungry. He doesn't have enough food at home. Punishing him will not solve the problem, it will only break his spirit. What he needs is compassion, not punishment." Mr. Green's eyes narrowed. "Compassion is not my concern, Mrs. Hayes. Order and discipline are. If we let this slide, others will follow his example. He must face consequences." Clara leaned forward, her heart pounding. "He is just a child. If we shame him now, we could crush his confidence forever. Imagine what it feels like to be hungry and desperate enough to hide bread in your pocket. Are we really going to punish him for trying to survive?" Her words hung in the air, but they did not soften Mr. Green. He folded his arms and shook his head. "You are letting emotions cloud your judgment. If you cannot support the school's decisions, perhaps you are not fit to teach here." Clara left the office with her head spinning. The conversation replayed in her mind again and again. She knew she had crossed a line in Mr. Green's eyes, but she could not regret defending Daniel. That evening, she stayed awake long after her mother had gone to bed, staring at the papers scattered across her small kitchen table. Was her career really at risk for one act of kindness? The following week confirmed her fears. Mr. Green announced at a staff meeting that Daniel would be suspended for a week as punishment for theft. Clara's chest tightened when she heard the words. She could not allow it. After the meeting, she approached him one last time. "Please," she begged softly. "Suspending him will only make things worse. Let me take responsibility. Let me talk to him, help him. Don't turn him into an example of failure." But Mr. Green was unmoved. His voice was final. "Enough, Mrs. Hayes. If you continue to challenge me, you will leave me no choice but to take action against you as well." It was not long before that action came. Clara received a formal letter stating that she was being dismissed from her position. The official reason was insubordination and failure to uphold school policies. She read the words with trembling hands, her heart sinking deeper than she thought possible. Teaching was her life, her calling, and in one cruel moment, it was taken away. Her colleagues were shocked, but few dared to speak up. Some whispered words of support in the hallways, but most stayed silent, afraid of risking their own jobs. Clara walked out of the school on her last day carrying only a box of her belongings, some books, a few student drawings, and the quiet ache of leaving behind children she loved. The hardest part was saying goodbye to her students. She stood in front of the classroom, her voice steady though her heart was breaking. "I want you to remember," she told them softly, "that you are important, and you are capable of great things. No matter what happens, never forget that you matter." The children hugged her, some with tears in their eyes. Daniel stood at the back, silent, his gaze heavy with unspoken gratitude and sorrow. That night, Clara sat by the window of her small apartment, looking out at the falling snow. Her mother tried to comfort her, but Clara felt a storm raging inside. She had lost her job, her stability, and perhaps her future in teaching, all because she had chosen to protect a hungry child. Yet, even in her grief, she knew one thing with certainty: if she had to choose again, she would still defend Daniel. Because sometimes, doing the right thing came at a cost. And though she didn't yet know it, this painful ending was only the beginning of a journey that would lead her to a place where her compassion would finally be valued. Clara spent the weeks after her dismissal in a haze of disbelief. Each morning, she would wake up at the usual time, as if her body still expected her to go to school, but instead of standing before a classroom, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. The silence felt heavy. She missed the sound of children's laughter, the shuffle of little feet, and the way her students' faces lit up when they understood a lesson. Teaching had been more than a job, it had been her calling, her identity. Without it, she felt like a part of herself had gone missing. But life did not stop simply because her heart was broken. Bills still came in the mail. Her mother still needed medicine and care. Clara had no choice but to look for work. She applied for teaching positions in nearby towns, but word of her dismissal seemed to follow her. Principals hesitated when they saw the reason on her record. Insubordination, the papers said. To them, it was a red flag. To Clara, it was a badge of honor, though one that cost her dearly. Eventually, she found temporary work as a substitute teacher. It was far from ideal. Each week brought her to a different classroom, a different set of students, and a different principal. She had no stability, no real sense of belonging. But she did her best. In every class she entered, she tried to leave a mark, even if only for a day. She smiled at children who looked lonely, encouraged the shy ones, and made sure no one felt left behind. It wasn't the same as having her own classroom, but it kept her spirit alive. Months passed, and Clara began to wonder if her dream of teaching full-time again was slipping away. She often walked home from substitute jobs with the cold wind pressing against her face, asking herself whether it was worth continuing. Yet, deep inside, she knew she could not give up. Teaching wasn't just something she did, it was who she was. One afternoon, while she was covering a class in a neighboring district, she overheard two teachers discussing an opening at Willow Creek Elementary. The school was searching for a permanent fourth-grade teacher. Clara's heart stirred with hope. That evening, she sat at her desk and carefully prepared her application, though she hesitated when she reached the part about her previous employment. She knew she could not hide the truth. With trembling hands, she wrote honestly about her dismissal, explaining that she had defended a child in need. She didn't know how the new principal would react, but she refused to lie about who she was. The interview day arrived, and Clara's nerves weighed heavily on her. She dressed in her best skirt and blouse, tied her hair neatly, and carried her worn leather bag, the same one she had used for years. As she entered the school, she noticed how different it felt from her previous workplace. The hallways were filled with student artwork, and the walls were painted with bright colors. There was warmth here, a sense of welcome. When she stepped into the principal's office, she met Margaret Lewis. Margaret was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a presence that felt both strong and gentle. She greeted Clara with a firm handshake and a warm smile. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Hayes. I've read your application with great interest." Clara's heart pounded. She expected difficult questions, maybe even judgment. But Margaret's tone was calm and sincere. As the interview began, Clara spoke about her passion for teaching, her love for children, and the way she tried to build trust in her classroom. When Margaret asked about her previous position, Clara paused, took a deep breath, and told the truth. "I was dismissed," Clara said quietly, "because I defended a student who was hungry. He had taken food, and I felt he needed compassion, not punishment. The principal disagreed, and I spoke out. I knew it might cost me my job, but I couldn't stand by and watch a child be shamed for something beyond his control." For a moment, there was silence. Clara's eyes lowered, afraid of what Margaret might say. But then Margaret leaned forward, her expression softening. "Mrs. Hayes," she said firmly, "that is not a weakness. That is courage. Too many people choose rules over kindness. What you did shows me exactly the kind of teacher you are, the kind our school needs. Clara's breath caught. She had expected suspicion or rejection, but instead, she found respect. A weight lifted from her heart, and for the first time in months, she felt hope returning. The rest of the interview flowed easily. Clara spoke openly about her teaching methods, her love for storytelling, and her belief that every child deserved to feel seen and valued. Margaret listened intently, nodding, occasionally smiling. At the end, she said, "I believe you belong here, Clara. If you're willing, I'd like to offer you the position." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She nodded quickly, her voice catching. "Yes. Yes, I'd be honored." The first day at Willow Creek Elementary felt like stepping into a new world. Clara walked into her classroom with fresh hope, her heart beating with excitement. The desks were neatly arranged, sunlight poured through the windows, and on the walls hung posters filled with encouragement. "You matter. You can succeed. You are capable." She knew she had found a place where her values matched the school's spirit. Her students greeted her with curiosity and warmth. Some were shy, some energetic, and some cautious. But by the end of the first week, Clara could already feel a bond forming. She told them stories, listened to their worries, and celebrated their small victories. It was as if the shadows of her past had finally given way to light. One afternoon, Margaret visited her classroom quietly, standing at the back as Clara read aloud to her students. When the story ended and the children hurried out for recess, Margaret approached her. "You have a gift," she said softly. "I can see it in the way they look at you. You were meant to teach." Clara smiled, her heart full. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen, not as a problem, not as a failure, but as the teacher she always believed she could be. That night, she walked home with a lighter step. The air was still cold, but it no longer felt heavy. She thought of Daniel, the boy whose hunger had cost her so much. She wondered where he was, how he was doing. Though she could not see him, she carried him in her heart. His story had changed her life, and because of him, she had found the strength to stand by her principles. Clara knew challenges would still come. Teaching was never easy, and the road ahead would not always be smooth. But now she had something she had lacked for so long: a leader who believed in her, a school that welcomed her, and a renewed sense of purpose. Her journey had not ended in loss after all. It had led her to a new beginning. And as she prepared her lessons for the next day, Clara whispered to herself, "This is where I'm meant to be." Clara's first months at Willow Creek Elementary were filled with a sense of renewal. Every morning, as she walked through the school's wide hallways decorated with children's drawings and colorful posters, she felt a quiet joy rising in her chest. The school was not perfect, no school ever was, but it had something her old workplace had lacked: a heart. She could feel it in the way the children laughed freely, in the way teachers supported each other, and in the way Principal Margaret Lewis guided her staff with both firmness and warmth. For Clara, it felt like a second chance. She was determined not to waste it. She threw herself into her work with the same passion she had always carried, but now, she no longer felt she had to hide her heart. She could show her compassion openly, and instead of being scolded, she was encouraged. That difference changed everything. Clara began to notice small details about her new students just as she always had. She paid attention to who came in tired, who hesitated to join in games, and who kept their worries tucked away behind quiet eyes. One girl, Emily, often arrived without breakfast. Another boy, Marcus, struggled with reading but was too embarrassed to ask for help. Clara's natural instinct was to step in gently, offering guidance without making them feel ashamed. Margaret noticed these efforts and supported them. One afternoon, after a staff meeting, she pulled Clara aside. "I see how you care for your students," she said with a smile. "We need more of that. Would you consider starting something here, something to help children who need extra support?" whether it's food, supplies, or just encouragement. Clara's heart leapt at the idea. She had always wanted to do more than just teach lessons. She wanted to build a safety net for the children who were often forgotten. That evening, she stayed up late at her kitchen table, sketching out ideas. By the time dawn touched the window, she had the beginnings of what she would later call the Student Support Fund. The fund began simply. Clara reached out to parents, local businesses, and even her own neighbors, asking for small donations. Some people gave money, others gave supplies like notebooks, coats, and shoes. Clara carefully organized everything, making sure the help reached the children quietly, without embarrassment. If a child needed new shoes, they appeared in the classroom as if by magic. If a child came without lunch, a meal voucher would be waiting for them at the cafeteria. To the children, it felt like kindness was always nearby, unseen but steady. At first, the fund was small, but word began to spread. Parents appreciated how their children were cared for, and the community admired Clara's efforts. Margaret often reminded the staff that the fund was not charity, it was dignity. It was a way to remind children that they were valued, no matter their circumstances. For Clara, the most rewarding part was seeing the difference it made. Emily, who once came hungry, began smiling more and participating in class. Marcus, who had struggled with reading, gained confidence after Clara spent extra time with him, sometimes slipping him small storybooks from the fund to practice at home. Slowly, the classroom became more than a place of lessons, it became a place of healing. But even as Clara grew in her role, she never forgot the pain of her past. The memory of Daniel, the boy whose hunger had cost her so much, still lived in her heart. There were nights when she lay awake, wondering what had become of him. Had he found someone else to defend him? Was he doing well? She didn't know, but she hoped her new efforts at Willow Creek were, in some way, honoring the lesson he had taught her. The school year passed quickly, filled with projects, performances, and the everyday joys of teaching. Clara's students adored her, often leaving little notes on her desk that said things like, "You are the best teacher ever," or "Thank you for helping me." These small gestures warmed her soul. For the first time in years, she felt truly at home. Her colleagues, too, began to look to her for inspiration. Teachers who had once kept strictly to their lessons started to adopt some of her methods, using storytelling to explain math, weaving kindness into discipline, and taking extra time to notice the children who struggled. Clara's quiet example was shaping more than just her classroom, it was shaping the culture of the school itself. Margaret often reminded her of the impact she was making. "Clara," she said one afternoon as they walked through the playground, "you've brought something special here. You remind us what teaching is really about. Not just grades or tests, but children, real children with real needs." Clara blushed at the praise, but inside she felt a quiet satisfaction. After everything she had lost, she had found something far greater, a place where her heart was not only accepted but celebrated. Still, her journey was not without challenges. Running the Student Support Fund took time and effort. There were days when donations ran low, and Clara worried about how to stretch the little they had. Sometimes she came home exhausted, her body aching from long hours. But even on the hardest days, she reminded herself why she was doing it. Every pair of shoes, every notebook, every smile on a child's face made it worth it. One particular moment stood out to her. A boy named Aaron had been struggling quietly for weeks, his shoes so worn that the soles flapped when he walked. One morning, Clara handed him a new pair from the fund. He looked up at her with wide eyes, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are these really for me?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said softly, kneeling to help him tie the laces. "They're for you. Because you deserve to walk with pride." Aaron's smile that day stayed with Clara for weeks. It was a reminder that small acts of kindness could leave marks that lasted a lifetime. By the end of the school year, the Student Support Fund had grown larger than Clara had ever imagined. Parents, businesses, and even former students contributed. Margaret proudly announced that the program would become a permanent part of the school, with Clara at its heart. The staff applauded her, but Clara only smiled humbly, her eyes shining with quiet gratitude. Her life had changed in ways she never expected. Where once she had been cast out for defending a child, she was now celebrated for the same courage. The contrast was not lost on her. Sometimes, when she sat at her desk after the children had gone home, she thought back to her darkest days and marveled at how far she had come. Teaching was still hard, but now it was also full of hope. Clara no longer felt like she was carrying the weight alone. She had allies, support, and a leader who believed in her. Most importantly, she had her students, whose laughter and trust gave her strength every day. As summer approached, Clara looked ahead with excitement rather than fear. She was already planning new projects for the next year: book drives, reading clubs, and even a mentorship program where older students could support younger ones. Her heart brimmed with ideas, all aimed at one simple goal: making sure every child knew they mattered. And deep inside, she knew she had found her place. What had once felt like the end of her teaching journey had become the beginning of something far greater. Clara Hayes was no longer just a struggling teacher. She was a builder of hope, a protector of children, and a living reminder that even in the face of loss, compassion could create miracles. Years passed, but Clara never forgot the day she had been dismissed from her first school. At the time, she had thought it was the end of everything she had worked for. Yet now, standing in her bright classroom at Willow Creek, she realized it had only been the beginning of a greater journey. Life had turned her pain into purpose. Her students were her pride. Each child who passed through her class left behind a piece of their story in her heart. Some were naturally gifted, others struggled daily, but all of them grew under her care. Clara did not measure success only by grades. To her, success was when a shy student finally raised their hand to answer a question, or when a child who once feared reading began to carry books home eagerly. Those small victories mattered as much as any test score. Over the years, the Student Support Fund grew stronger. What had started as a small idea at her kitchen table had become a cornerstone of the school. Families knew that if they faced hard times, the school community would help. New shoes, warm coats, healthy lunches, and even school trip fees were quietly covered through the fund. No child had to feel ashamed or left out. Clara's efforts did not go unnoticed. Parents often stopped her in the parking lot just to say thank you. Some left handwritten letters on her desk, expressing gratitude for the way she had cared for their children. One mother wrote, "You didn't just teach my son. You gave him confidence when he had none. We will never forget you." But the most touching moment of all came one spring afternoon when she received a letter in the mail. The envelope had no return address, just her name written in careful handwriting. Inside was a short note that brought tears to her eyes. "Dear Mrs. Hayes, you may not remember me, but I will never forget you. My name is Daniel. Years ago, when I was just a boy, you defended me when I was caught taking bread. I was ashamed, and I thought the world had turned against me. But you stood up for me. You believed in me when no one else did. That moment has stayed with me all these years. Today, I am in college, studying social work, because I want to help children the way you helped me. Thank you for seeing me, for protecting me, and for teaching me that kindness matters. You changed my life." Daniel. Clara read the letter over and over, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had wondered for so long what had become of Daniel, and now she knew. He had not been lost to despair. He had found his way, inspired by the very compassion that had cost her so much. The thought filled her with a deep peace. When she shared the letter with Margaret, the principal smiled warmly. "This is your legacy, Clara. Not just the fund, not just the lessons. It's the lives you've touched. That's what will last." Clara carried Daniel's words in her heart as she continued teaching. They reminded her that every act of kindness, no matter how small, could ripple far beyond what she could see. It strengthened her resolve to keep going, even on the hardest days. The years flowed gently, each one adding to the story of her classroom. Former students would often return to visit her. Some came back as teenagers, tall and confident, eager to tell her about their dreams. Others visited as young adults, ready to begin their careers. They always remembered her warmth, her patience, and the way she made them feel valued. One evening, at a school celebration, a group of parents and teachers surprised her with a plaque that read, "To Mrs. Hayes, who taught us that compassion is the greatest lesson of all." As she held the plaque, her eyes glistened. She thought back to the frightened young teacher she once was, facing dismissal and despair, and marveled at how far life had carried her. Her mother, who had lived to see Clara's new beginning, often told her, "You turned your sorrow into something beautiful, Clara. That's a rare gift." Those words stayed with her long after her mother passed away, becoming another source of strength. In time, Clara began mentoring new teachers. She shared with them the lessons she had learned, not just about teaching methods, but about the heart of the profession. "Remember," she would say, "every child has a story. Some carry burdens you cannot see. Be gentle. Be patient. And never forget that kindness can change a life." Her wisdom shaped a new generation of educators, who carried her values into their own classrooms. The culture of Willow Creek grew stronger, built on compassion, empathy, and courage. Clara never sought recognition, but it found her nonetheless. Years later, she was invited to speak at a regional education conference. Nervously, she stood at the podium, facing hundreds of teachers. She told them her story, how she had once lost her job for protecting a child, and how that loss had led her to a place where her compassion became her strength. Her voice trembled at times, but her message was clear. "Rules are important," she said, "but never let them silence your heart. Children remember how you make them feel long after they forget your lessons. Be the teacher who sees them, protects them, and believes in them." The audience rose to their feet in applause. For Clara, the standing ovation was not for her alone, but for every teacher who had ever chosen kindness over convenience. As she grew older, Clara thought often about her legacy. She knew that buildings and programs could change, but the seeds she had planted would continue to grow in the lives of her students. Some would become teachers, doctors, writers, or leaders. Others would simply become kind-hearted adults who passed on the lessons of empathy they had learned in her classroom. Either way, her work would live on. One quiet afternoon, as she packed away papers at her desk, she found herself smiling. On the wall hung drawings from her current class: bright suns, tall trees, and stick figure families with smiling faces. Each picture was a reminder of the joy her students found in learning and the safety they felt in her care. She realized then that her greatest reward was not the awards or recognition she had received, but the quiet moments, the laughter of children, the spark of understanding in their eyes, and the knowledge that she had made a difference. Clara's story had come full circle. She had once been a struggling teacher, fired for protecting a poor child. But through resilience, faith, and compassion, she had found her place in a school that valued her heart. And in doing so, she had touched countless lives. Her journey proved a simple but powerful truth: sometimes, what seems like the end is only the beginning of something far greater. And sometimes, the most important battles are not won with rules, but with courage, kindness, and love.